This is Australia, one of the largest countries in the world in terms of area. But Australia is in a deep mess today. Although Australia is often counted among the wealthiest countries globally, where salaries and standards of living surpass those of many developed nations, it's slowly getting entangled in a problem that could become a significant headache in the coming times. Australia is renowned worldwide for its wildlife and stunning coastline. Kangaroos, pythons, black snakes, and many other unique animals which are only found in Australia. Another thing Australia is famous for globally is its peculiar geography. Situated in the southern Indian Ocean, it is entirely disconnected from the rest of the world, making it the only country that is also a continent. When we look at the map of Australia, one obvious thing stands out. About 90% of its area is covered by deserts, which is why roughly 85% of Australia's population resides along its coastline. So if you look closely, about 85 to 90% of Australia is practically empty. Around 3/4 of Australia's population lives in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, all three of which are situated on the coastline. And to further understand this population pattern, we need to delve into history, because Australia remained largely unknown throughout human history. It was first discovered by a Dutchman named William Jan in 1606 when he stumbled upon it while sailing back from Indonesia. Due to a storm, his ship drifted into the Timor Sea, where he spotted a distant island. This was Australia. William reported his discovery to his countrymen upon his return, but it wasn't until 1770 that British explorer Captain James Cook, accompanied by his crew, embarked on a voyage and landed on the eastern side of Australia at Botany Bay. When they disembarked, they encountered fierce clashes with the local inhabitants, forcing Captain Cook and his crew to retreat to save their lives. 8 years later, Captain Arthur Phillips arrived here with 11 ships and 300 people and captured this coastline. After bringing this part under British control, they attempted to explore the western side of Australia, but many of their companions fell victim to the harsh desert climate and severe thirst, which forced them to retreat. Then in 1851, Australia became famous when large gold reserves were discovered some 210 kilometres away from Sydney in a village named Bathurst. Over the next 20 years, 40% of the world's gold was being produced in Australia. All this gold was sent to Britain, and the British government used it to maintain the value of the pound. These 20 years were called the Years of Gold Rush. During this time, hundreds of thousands of people migrated to Australia from Europe and America. When the gold was discovered, Australia's population was 450,000, and 20 years later, in 1871, it had reached 1.7 million. From 1871 to 1900, Australia was divided into 6 colonies. Then in 1901, these colonies merged to form a country called the Commonwealth State of Australia, and thus began Australia's journey of progress. During this time, apart from white people, no one was allowed to migrate to Australia, and this remained the policy for the next 60 years. Then finally, in 1966, the non-white immigration policy was abolished, and immigration criteria were changed to skill set rather than skin colour. Following this change, thousands of people from Asia, the Middle East and the Pacific started immigrating to Australia, and to this day, people from various cultures and countries are settling in Australia, making it a multicultural country where you will find people of every race and religion. Today, Australia is known as the friendliest country in the world, and in terms of quality of life, it ranks 8th globally, making it a dream country for many people. However, Australia is falling into a trap. In recent years, it has become one of the least affordable countries in the world. 3 Australian cities have made it to the list of the top 10 unaffordable cities. After Hong Kong, Sydney is the second most expensive city in the world, and the housing market plays a significant role in making Australia unaffordable. Now, you might be thinking that since there is so much empty space in Australia, buying a house there would be very affordable, but the reality is quite the opposite. But before I delve into that, let me give you a bit of insight into the Australian mentality. Regardless of wherever you are in the world, owning a home is a universal desire, but for Australians, a home is a national identity. In Australia, a home is seen as a symbol of stability and prosperity. Even today, 75% of Australians consider owning their own home as their top priority and dream. However, this dream is slowly fading away, and let me explain why I am saying so. In 1970, the average annual salary in Sydney was $4,200, and at that time, the price of a normal house was around $18,700. By 2024, the average annual salary has reached $74,000, which means it is 17 times higher than the salary in 1970. But on the other hand, the average price of a house today is $1.5 million, which is 80 times higher than the housing price in the 1970s. This means that even if you save your entire salary for the next 20 years, you will barely be able to afford a house, because in those 20 years, the price of houses will have skyrocketed. And this situation is not just in Sydney, but in all major Australian cities. Even those earning $100,000 in Australia can only afford 13% of the houses. And even for these 13%, they will have to take out hefty mortgage, which is why Australian households have one of the highest debts in the world. And this situation is getting worse every year, because the Australian population is increasing by 400,000 people annually. Australia's population growth is almost double that of Canada and the USA. The biggest reason for this population growth is immigration. Every year, thousands of people from China and South Asia come to Australia. Some of them become nationals after a few years, but many spend thousands of dollars on degrees and still are not able to obtain nationality. They keep extending their visas by doing odd jobs and enrolling in various small colleges, hoping that someday they will fulfill the requirements for permanent residency. However, to accommodate such a large number of immigrants, the demand for housing exceeds the supply, and due to this gap between supply and demand, house prices in Australia are skyrocketing, because 90% of Australians live in just 4 cities, despite the fact that there is a vast land lying empty between them. But the problem is that land is not suitable for development or habitation. That's why there are only these 4 cities to accommodate the rising population. Since all the jobs and universities are also in these cities, immigrants and students also flock to these cities. Now, Australia has one option, which is to impose restrictions on immigration, but doing so would have a severe impact on Australia's economy, because almost 17% of Australia's economy depends on foreign students. These are the students who come to Australia for education, so that they can complete their studies and then secure a job to obtain permanent residency. The fees of universities in Australia are very high, and students coming from India, Pakistan and China contribute significantly to the Australian economy through their tuition fees. Secondly, Australia's local population is insufficient to fulfill industry requirements, and hence it needs labour from abroad, but it requires labour that can speak English well and has relevant skills. So Australia cannot reduce immigration, although it has already tightened its policies to grant permanent residency only to qualified individuals. Now, since thousands of people are coming to Australia every year, accommodating them is becoming very difficult, and therefore Australia now is working on plans to build dams and irrigate the desert and cultivate fields here so that this empty land can also be made livable. But executing this plan will take several years, and until then, Australia will have to build houses for the immigrants arriving in these coastal cities, and Australians consequently will have to bear high rents and housing prices until that time. But if we look on the other side, Australia truly is an example of proper planning and dedication. A country that was uninhabited 200 years ago is now one of the top economies in the world. So let's see how Australia copes with this housing crisis. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video with another interesting topic. Take care.